128 monsters in the bestiary fought and defeated, 28 trophies including the platinum earned on the PlayStation, and all this took over about 18 hours of total playtime, though I'll admit I spent a lot of that time listening to the awesome music in the music player. Hey everyone, and welcome to the Completionist, where we don't just beat the games, we complete them. I completed the pixel remaster of Final Fantasy II, and even though it's a remaster of an older title, I found it compact yet compelling, and I give this game my completionist rating of completed. So sit back, relax, and let's talk about the world of Final Fantasy. Though, no, not the game World of Final Fantasy, because that's a whole different game. We're going back to the origins of Final Fantasy. But we're not playing Final Fantasy Origins though, because that technically is Final Fantasy, but not Final Fantasy II, which is the game I'm talking about today. Will someone roll the intro and save me here on this one? I'm gonna be here quite a while.
Yes! All glory goes to the winner. Over. Wake up! Last one standing wins. KO!
I am a die-hard fan of the entire series, but I've never played Final Fantasy II. And now that the Pixel Remaster Collection is finally available on pretty much every platform you want, I figure now is as good a time as any to pull the ripcord and dive in. Okay, so there was a moment when Final Fantasy II was weirdly hard to find and play as an RPG fan in the US. Younger fans may not know this, but Final Fantasy as a series didn't even come to the West until there were 3 whole-ass games out in Japan. Simultaneous worldwide releases were not really a thing of the time. In the US, we did get Final Fantasy II in 1991, but what we didn't know back then in the 90s was that our Final Fantasy II was on the Super Nintendo, and that was actually Final Fantasy IV. The original Final Fantasy II didn't come to the US right away for a host of reasons, including a slow localization effort and doubt from Square and Nintendo that players would be interested in a slower paced NES game from a few years back when the more powerful and shiny SNES was sitting right there. Final Fantasy II, the actual Final Fantasy II, eventually found its US audience via a couple different channels. There was an anthology release for the PlayStation 1 featuring CGI cutscenes, and in 2004 came the Dawn of Souls collection for the Game Boy Advance, which included Final Fantasy 1 and 2 in a neat little bundle with updated graphics, a redone soundtrack, gameplay tweaks, and even extra content. This game has now had several different re-releases, remakes, and remasters. Over the years, I have heard all kinds of mixed things about Final Fantasy II. This game has a reputation. Though it is the second mainline Final Fantasy title, it junks many mechanics established in that first game in favor of doing things a little differently. You still control a party of adventurers roaming across an overworld and going from town to town and dungeon to dungeon, and the combat does remain turn-based. But Final Fantasy II's leveling system is completely different from its contemporaries. In many turn-based RPGs, the way you make your party stronger is by defeating monsters to earn experience points, which eventually make your characters level up. Not the case in Final Fantasy II. Instead, almost every stat is tied to how often you use that stat. Want Maria's MP to increase? You better start casting spells in every fight. Want to make Guy's attacks stronger? Equip a weapon in each hand and go nuts with direct attacks. Now, I am oversimplifying a little bit here, but just know that it's a fairly unique system even to this day. Experience points are not the only thing Final Fantasy II changed. 2 also leans hard into having a deep and detailed plot, made all the more notable when compared to the plots of other console games at the time of release. This game features a dark and far-reaching story, focusing on rebellion and the costs of fighting against an evil empire from the perspective of a group of nobodies. Instead of 4 random warriors of light who must save the world from evil, the 3 main party members of 2 are actual characters characters with backstories and relationships to one another. Note that I said 3 main party members, which points yet to another deviation. Players control a 4-character party for most of the game, but the 4th character is essentially a rotating guest star. Looking at it this way, this is a bold choice. Almost every Final Fantasy game is renowned for having memorable casts of characters, and I'd go so far to say that the trend started here. This game essentially removes a 4th main character in favor of party members who join the group and then depart after a dungeon or 2. It never quite feels justified to me, but I found myself more intrigued than put off. This game is a story-forward experience, and the main exploration mechanic reflects that. FF2 uses a keyword system, basically a simplified text parser. In conversations with important NPCs, you can memorize certain keywords, which can then be used with other characters to progress to the next plot. Kenji Terada, the scenario writer for the first 3 Final Fantasy games, wanted the keyword system to feel like players were having conversations with NPCs in the game. In a Famitsu interview from 1988, he said, "I think players will enjoy the sense of presence of being there that these more natural conversations lend to the experience. The end result is really novel, though occasionally a little obtuse." So when I completed the original first Final Fantasy, I played the 20th anniversary PSP remake version, and truth be told, I kind of regretted that choice. Final Fantasy is a perfectly fine game, but that specific version is hell for completionists. So I went a different route here. I wanted the most recent, updated version of the original 1988 game. So I went with the Pixel Remaster and completed it on PlayStation 5. Now, most of the time when you guys watch the show, if you're wondering why I didn't do a certain port or the other, I will explain myself, but time and context is everything. So in my mind, I want to cover the game in the most available form for you at home. No need to fight with random people on eBay for a copy or something, you know? The Pixel Remaster Collection is an interesting experiment from Square Enix, where the company actually acknowledges that trying to play their older Final Fantasy titles all in one place is a bit of a hassle. Now you can play Final Fantasy 1 through 6 with a consistent art style and some modern quality of life features. The physical versions and special editions are already scarce, but the Pixel Remasters are a great option for people who want digital copies on their consoles. So in the case of Final Fantasy II, you can debate whether this is the most complete version of the game. The GBA version has an entire post-game chapter, and the PlayStation 1 Origins Collection has those CGI cutscenes that are amazing and terrible in equal measure. But I wanted 2 things from completing the game. 1, a clear roadmap for completion, which the Pixel Remaster provides in the form of achievements and trophies, and 2, the nostalgic feeling of playing a classic pixel art masterpiece. The Pixel Remaster delivers that. Actually, there's the 3rd thing that I wanted, which is an unspoken piece of the puzzle that I rarely comment on. I wanted a relatively chill time. Completing this game is straightforward. By being thorough and taking my time as I finished the story, I was able to earn practically every single trophy. There's a little grinding to fill out the bestiary, but less than you might think. Certainly way less than I experienced completing the first Final Fantasy on the PSP. Battling every monster and opening every chest may sound like impossible feats, but truthfully, this was extremely doable. As you all know, I love RPGs, and it sometimes makes me sad that I don't have the time to complete as many as I want for the show here. There are an endless amount of classic RPGs that I would love to feature, but that I have to rule out because of insane completion requirements or other time commitments. Older, relatively simple RPGs are becoming more and more scarce, and frankly, less viable options for me to feature as the YouTube algorithm favors the newer releases. But Final Fantasy II is worth completing and can be done in a reasonable amount of time. And as I battled familiar favorite monsters and rediscovered Final Fantasy icons like Cid, Chocobos, and Ultima, I found that Final Fantasy II is more integral to the series than it is given credit for. Completing any Final Fantasy game is always a personal experience. Whether you come to the series from its 8-bit beginnings or from playing the latest bombastic blockbuster, Final Fantasy endures. Maybe you connect with the characters or the music or a new gameplay mechanic, but Final Fantasy has always bred innovation. As I completed Final Fantasy II, I was struck by just how much innovation that was implemented. The first game broke new ground in terms of world building, tone, and aesthetics. But Final Fantasy II surprised me by being a game that, well, here we go, feels like Final Fantasy. All right, I know it's a meme, but hear me out. What do I mean by that? Well, for me, it's simple. A Final Fantasy game features a well-told story, interesting characters and moments, and a battle system that hooks you. Whether you're in Midgar, Ivalice, or some other unnamed world, there's a sense of people coming together to unite against a greater evil. For some, that means doing so with turn-based battles or nothing. But I've come to embrace the more action-oriented combat of the latest entries in the franchise. To me, the combat mechanics are less important than the overall vibe that any given Final Fantasy projects. With that said, Final Fantasy II delivers. Now, hear me out. I'm gonna ruin these names, and I'm sorry if I'm getting them all wrong, nails on the chalkboard style, so you've been warned. The game starts off with a bang. As the opening cutscene succinctly puts it, an age of peace is at an end. Firion, Maria, Guy, and Leon are best friends on the run from the hostile forces of the invading Palamecian Empire. They are caught and immediately defeated in an unwinnable opening battle. By some miracle, Firion, Maria, and Guy are rescued and rehabilitated in the town of Altair under the care of Princess Hilda and the White Wizard Minwu. The three friends want to strike back against the army that killed all of their family and friends, and of course rescue Leon. Hilda takes their youthful energy and rage and forges it into a useful weapon. It turns out Princess Hilda is building a revolution in the hopes that a ragtag group of cut-ups would eventually be able to stand up against the evil emperor and his right-hand man, who happens to be a Dark Knight clad in black armor and wielding enormous power. Okay, so it's kind of like Star Wars, but you know what? It works. By throwing players right into the action, the stakes are desperately high from the very beginning. Every plot point feels like a last chance Hail Mary throw and keeps the action surging forward. There's a real momentum to the plot of Final Fantasy II. I think a lot of that is because most of the characters are well defined, even if not all of them are around for long. Obviously, we aren't hitting the emotional highs that the series would eventually become known for, but you can see glimmers of that ambition here. There were several moments that were genuinely shocking and even moving. An early string of quests has your party racing to stop the launch of the Dreadnought, a massively powerful airship. In many traditional stories, the good guys would get to the airship and stop it before it does any harm. In Final Fantasy II, you completely fail to stop the launch. The Dreadnought ascends and proceeds to bomb the ever-loving hell out of a bunch of previously visited areas. From then on, anytime you visit the towns of Poft or Plume or Altair, the streets are blasted and burned. NPCs in those areas will talk about how all the townspeople are dead and how the Empire is unbeatable. It was cool to realize that the creators of this game had lofty goals. Kenji Terada, the game's writer, said, "I'd like games to provoke a wider variety of emotions. Crying, laughing, being angry at the end. Stories that move people are hard to make, but we have to try." Later in the game, you're joined by a character, Joseph, a single dad who keeps to himself, but agrees to help Princess Hilda and the Wild Rose Rebellion. With Joseph's help, you're able to reach a snow cave and retrieve a key item. But after getting what you need and defeating numerous enemies, a trap is triggered and the group is about to be crushed by a giant boulder. But Joseph throws himself in front of the rock to give Maria, Firion, and Guy time to escape. Even though I only had Joseph in my party for maybe an hour or less of game time, I found myself moved by his sacrifice. To me, Joseph captures the best and worst parts of Final Fantasy II. The entire scene with the trap is animated really well. The art and character portraits are very solid. The music hits and the writing conveys emotion. I found this entire scene really affecting. There are some structural negatives to Final Fantasy II. Joseph, for obvious reasons, is no longer in the party. Eventually, he's replaced by someone new, and that's where the mechanics start to feel a bit creaky. Since your characters don't have levels, it isn't like when a new party member joins, they're scaled to your current stats. When someone new joins the group, they always felt a little underpowered with a handful of exceptions. In the early game, your fourth member is the White Wizard, who has practically every white magic in the game already learned and feels incredibly useful. But I never never felt like any other fourth party member had that level of utility. That fourth character almost always felt like a damage sponge or someone I would put on item duty. I appreciated how these characters were used story-wise. Most characters feel like they're given a short arc within a wider range of the story for the limited time they're with you. That doesn't always translate into fun gameplay. After I lost the White Wizard, I figured I'd experience a different specialist with each new party member, but that isn't really the case either. This feels a little like a missed opportunity, but hey, the base game is over 30 years old at this point. I'll take great ambition with mediocre execution over the safe, boring choice anytime. Completing Final Fantasy II does have its occasional boring, slower paced part. There are multiple trophies associated with filling up the bestiary, where monsters are only recorded once fought and defeated, so a little grinding is absolutely necessary, since some monsters are missable as they only spawn in certain areas. Now, in this case, I did have to use a guide to ensure that I fought every creature in a given area every time I ventured into a brand new one. For as much as I think the story, plot, and characters are very well realized, the majority of this game is spent in turn-based combat. The core back and forth from Final Fantasy I makes a return, but there are some differences. Party members can increase their proficiency with specific weapons and spells as each one improves with repeated use. There are trophies associated with maxing out a weapon type as well as reaching level 16 with at least one spell. But that trophy doesn't ask you to do that for every type of weapon and spell, which makes it fairly easy to earn. I like that you can basically fully customize your 3 main party members however you see fit. You're not choosing a character class, and there are no high-level promotions with special abilities like the Ninja or the Knight from Final Fantasy I. But with a little bit of patience, you can basically create your own classes. If you want a black mage, just buy the appropriate tomes and learn whatever magic you please, and then cast whichever spells as frequently as you can to increase that spell's rank and power. It's the same with weapons, but where things get a little dicey is with armor, shields, HP, and magic defense. Generally, stats only improve when they're interacted with. So for a party member to rapidly gain HP, they must be attacked in battle. To raise magic defense, they must take damage from magic spells. So early on in my playthrough, I thought I had to get lucky to improve basic stats. One of the big things that Final Fantasy II is known for is that you can exploit how growth works by attacking your own party members to raise their HP. But I ended up never having to do that. By the time I reached the end game, my party was way more than powerful enough to defeat anything I came across. That's mostly because the standard random encounter rate is really high, just like in Final Fantasy I. So I never had to worry about whether I'd fight enough battles to improve my stats. Though with the help of the bestiary, I did notice that at a certain point, fighting low-ranked enemies stops being beneficial. You're more likely to raise your weapon rank if you battle stronger foes, so you're constantly encouraged to keep moving forward. Like many remasters, remakes, ports, and even modern RPGs, the Pixel Remaster includes options to increase or decrease the random encounter rate, but I kept it at the default for the sake of trying to keep the gameplay as close to the original as possible. There are some non-gameplay related options in the Pixel Remaster too. You can swap between the original and remastered soundtrack, and even change the font from a pixelated version to a smoother look. The soundtrack, unsurprisingly, is amazing. Nobuo Uematsu has done it again, although this is the second time technically in the history of the franchise, but you know what I mean. And I appreciated being able to go back between 2 different versions of the soundtrack as I was playing. Shoutouts to Pandemonium, an extremely epic track. There's a music player in every Pixel Remaster's game, but it's not anything that you have to unlock. The completionist side of me wonders why the music player isn't made into a reward, but the preservationist side of me is grateful that anyone can access and enjoy the music player at any time without having to dump dozens of hours into an older title. It's the same with the illustration gallery. This gallery is full of concept art and character designs from the immortal Yoshitaka Amano, a real treasure trove for gaming historians and really anyone interested in the never-ending Final Fantasy saga. Final Fantasy II has some particularly amazing concept art, and it's a treat to see it all collected here in an easy-to-view form. Take note, publishers making collections and remasters like this one. This is extremely cool. It's a cool way to appeal to your fan base. I love being able to see monster concept art and then fight the pixelated versions of those same monsters in the actual game. Final Fantasy has always had great enemy design, and that's still the case here. Maybe I'm just nostalgic, but I even enjoyed the classic RPG trope of monster palette swaps. Whoa, is that ogre blue? Am I about to get wrecked? Nope. Actually, battles are still pretty easy. Never mind. The modern mechanical touches of the Pixel Remaster made the completion experience easier as well. The original game did not have a auto battle feature, but I appreciated how it's used here. It's totally optional, but turning on auto battle makes exploring in the mid to late game much more bearable. Since the average random encounter isn't all that difficult in this game, it's nice to be able to essentially roll through enemies without pressing a bunch of buttons. As I made my way through Final Fantasy II, I felt a deep appreciation for how far things have come. I know I'm not a super unique case, but I have played a ton of RPGs, and I'd like to think that I've seen the genre grow and change over time. I'm no expert, but the sheer amount of hours I've spent learning the ins and outs of these types of games helps me further appreciate the deviations that Final Fantasy II makes or was making at the time. I'm not trying to make this game seem like more than it is, but there is something profoundly satisfying about returning to an older title and experiencing it for what it is. There are barely any completion bonuses in Final Fantasy II. The trophies that have been integrated into the experience don't force the player to go very far out of their way. Weirdly, this game has no major secret challenges. No super bosses, no hidden subclass or ultra powerful party members. Some of the other versions of Final Fantasy II do include additional boss fights and dungeons, like Frekios, but this remaster is basically a one-to-one recreation of the original game's challenges. Everything is right on the surface, and you know what? That's totally fine. To me, that's why this game gets a completed rating. You may as well experience everything the game has to offer, especially if you love the Final Fantasy series and want to see the themes and tropes that would eventually thread their way into every future title. It is very satisfying to get to know Cid and his airship. This is the first appearance of Cid, and this version of him is everything I wanted him to be. Rough exterior, but a heart of gold. I guess you could apply that to the entire game. It may play a little rough, and be a little hard to navigate at times, but if you persevere, you are in for a wonderful time. Completing any Final Fantasy is something that I never get tired of doing. Final Fantasy II is a super impressive experience, and I think it holds up pretty well. And the Pixel Remaster version goes down extremely smoothly for completionists. I found it rewarding to complete it on its own merits, and its story, art, and music are all well worth experiencing to the fullest. This game may have a reputation as being one of the weaker mainline Final Fantasies, but I give Final Fantasy II my completionist rating of completed. That'll do for today's episode. Sound off in the comments down below about your favorite classic Final Fantasy there. And hey, if you enjoyed this episode about an old school RPG, you can check out my Golden Sun episodes from many years ago. Thanks for watching, and hey, consider joining our Patreon. Until then, see you next time.